Hey guys, all right. Moving on to working my way through the preterism ideas into Matthew 24. I'm going to address Matthew 16, Luke 9, and Mark 9 in this one. This will be the some of you not standing here, and just offer my input on it. And as obvious, people will be free to believe whatever it is they believe. But we start here in chapter 8 of Mark, okay? And Willie T's really long video, and that's why I decided to break this up in sections. He covers so many verses, and there's so much to be said about it that it would be an hour and a half video at least. So I'm going to try and chop it up into smaller pieces and offer some of the alternatives along the way before trying to string all of Matthew 24 or the Olivet Discourse together. So we start in Mark chapter 8. And this is, if my memory serves me correctly, this is the Mark 9:8-9 is the one that he uses. But I want to point out some things in the text. 8:31, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but of the things of man." And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me or of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father and holy angels." Chapter 9. And he said to them, "Truly I say to you." So in Mark, it gives you the impression that he's speaking of the people and the disciples. And he said to them, "Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power." Now what follows is the Transfiguration. And I have kind of waffled on the idea in the past of the resurrection versus the Transfiguration, but I am going to go with the Transfiguration. I think that is what is intended here, and I'm going to spell out the reasons why, as well as some corrections to the text. And in Transfiguration, after he says that you will see him coming with power, he says, "And after 6 days Jesus took him with Peter and James and John and led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, 'Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah.' For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, 'This is my beloved Son, listen to him.' And suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them, but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, he charged them to tell no one with what they had seen, until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what this rising from the dead might mean. And they asked him, 'Why do the scribes say Elijah must come first?' And he said to them, 'Elijah does come first to restore all things. And how is it written, the Son of Man should suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I tell you, Elijah has come, and they did whatever they pleased with him, as it is written of him.'" So that's Mark 9. Now, this is clearly a vision, and the other texts I think go on to add or correct to that. There's some things we're going to have to deal with head on here, but it gives you an impression that it's talking to everybody the way this comes across. And then the Transfiguration happens, so everyone agrees with that, I would assume, with Mark 8 and 9. And as far as it being a vision, they didn't literally see Moses, and they didn't see Elijah literally, in my opinion, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But just remember, as they were coming down off the mountain, and suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone but Jesus only. So all of a sudden, it disappeared. So we go, and he says, we go to Luke 9 and verse 18. "Now it happened that he was praying alone the disciples were with him. So I imagine that he's kind of off by himself praying, and the disciples were with him. And he asked them, I guess after praying, who do the crowd say that I am? And he said, and they answered, John the Baptist, but others say Elijah, and others that one of the prophets of the old has risen. Then he said to them, but who do you say I am? And Peter answered, the Christ of God. And he strictly charged and commanded them, the disciples, to tell this to no one, saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and the third day be raised. This goes into the whole messianic secret thing. And he said to all the disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses or forfeits himself? For whomever is ashamed of me and of my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in glory, and the glory of the Father and the glory of the holy angels. But I tell you, truly there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God. And then it goes into the Transfiguration. Now about 8 days after this saying, he took Peter and John and James, and he went up to the mountain praying. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, the two men talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory, and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Not knowing what he said, as he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid. As they entered the cloud, a voice came out of the cloud saying, This is my son, my chosen one, listen to him. And then when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent and told no one in those days anything of what they had seen. The next day, when they came down from the mountain, a great crowd met him, and behold, a man from the crowd cried out, Teacher, I beg you. And it goes on. Okay, so here they're separated from the people. They come down to the people, but the direct subjects of this passage were the disciples, period. He was praying alone. The disciples were with him. He talks to the disciples. And when he calls out to them, the only people that were around were the disciples until they came down. So now we go to Matthew 16. 16 and 13. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, Who do they say the Son of Man is? And they said to him, Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He said to them, But who do you say that I am? Simon Peter replied, You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, scribes, and be killed on the third day and raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, Far be it from you, Lord, that this should happen to you. But he turned to Peter and said, Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Then Jesus told his disciples, If anyone comes after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but he who loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Okay? And there's no reason. I know people want to slam them together, but this whole repaying each person according to what he has done, is not the same sentence as trying to say, truly I say to you, some will not taste death. I think it would be a mistake to shove those two things together. And then what happens? And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up to the high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came, touching them, saying, Rise and have no fear. And when they uplifted their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Tell no one of the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And the disciples asked him, Then why do the scribes say that Elijah first must come? And he goes on. So here it is clarified that it is a vision. All right. And it's clear from the imagery, I think, what is going on in this. And is, I guess what I would say, if you're going to take these verses, there's 2 major problems with this. If you're going to take these verses and say they do apply to 70 AD, that is what the first thing is. There's no reason to believe there are any disciples alive in 70 AD. The one exception you might have is John. But I do believe if Irenaeus is right about John the Presbyter in the book of Revelation, if that is the case, then there's no reason to believe John is alive either. There are no disciples alive at 70 AD, as far as I can tell. And when you look into this, you will find wildly varying reports. Some of them will not have hardly any of them living past 60. Some will be in 65. Some put them at 4 or 5 disciples at 70 and beyond. But I think the more trustworthy consensus based on the church and its early visions is that they were all dead. And the one exception for some reason is this, that John the Apostle clings on. But like I said, I think if Irenaeus is correct about John the Presbyter, I think that you may have 2 Johns being confused. And there's no reason to believe they were alive. And as far as vision goes, the word hor it's a spectacle, a vision, a spectacle vision, that which is seen. It's a neuter noun derived from horao, to see spiritually and mentally, a vision, spiritual seeing, focusing on the impact it has on one beholding the vision. So that's what that word means. It was meant to have a spiritual impact on them. The second thing I want to apply to this verse, well, all of these, is the oddity of the transfiguration occurring after this. If the transfiguration is not the Son of Man coming into his kingdom or coming in his kingdom power, or some kind of sign of that, what is it? It's just it just becomes very odd to throw this in the text behind that. One text says 6 days later, one text says 8 days later. It's obvious that only one of them can be right as far as how many days passed until that happened. That's one thing I don't goof around with anymore. If there are things that need to be fixed in the text, they need to be fixed. And I think that they are telling their own stories. And I think that's something people need to kind of understand when they look at these. But at the end of the day, the Transfiguration itself is a very strange event. Now, why would I say the Transfiguration is the Son coming in his power? And if it's a vision, and it has, even in the Luke and Mark versions of it, it does, I think anyone who's honest with themselves would have to admit it has a vision quality. So if you want to reject John putting the words in Jesus's mouth to tell no one of the vision, and the Aramaic Hebrewic terms seem to carry the same meaning, then what is going on here if it's not a vision? I think it's clearly a vision. When you look down, you look up, somebody's gone. It's similar to the Revelation vision. I don't think John, the writer, went into heaven. I don't think anything happened. I think it was a vision. But what's important about this vision is that they see Jesus speaking with Moses and Elijah. Moses, the law, Elijah, the prophets. And then you have God saying, "This is my son, listen to him." And that is the kingdom being assigned to Jesus at that point on God's behalf. God says this. God says his son is the one you should listen to. Even though you have Moses and Elijah present, the son is the one you should listen to. So that would be my thing. All the history that seems to point is there were no apostles alive. You know, like I said, there's varying wild dates about this, but we don't have any writings or testimonies. It would make perfect sense that they were all dead, and that does seem to be the case. I have watched various debates on this subject, and even people like Hank Hanegraaff and that what's that guy's name? Peter. His name might be Peter Williams. I'm not sure, but these guys have squared off on this, and even they, the preterists and partial preterists, because that's what Hank Hanegraaff is, they don't really challenge that the apostles were probably dead, with the exception of John. Okay, now the other option you have is to go with Mark and try to force that to be all the people that were present, so some of them were alive. Well, if you take, to me, Matthew and Luke seem to be more corrective to Mark in this regard. It really does. Because if you take Mark and you say that one has to be correct, and that it's not, you know, people need to understand with these Bible translations, they're nothing more than Bible interpretations. And they, you know, just the way they come down in English and stuff, we say that's the way they have to be. And the answer is no, that's not the way they have to be. Not even close. That's not the way they have to be. So those would be my main bones of contention. One, it doesn't appear any of these guys were alive, and that may include John, if John the Presbyter was the writer of Revelation, which, you know, outside of evangelical circles, that seems to be the case. Nobody seems to argue with that too much, because the writing, they can look at these things and detect the writing and see who's writing this and why. And if you want to say Revelation was dictated, it's the same thing. I mean, would he speak differently than the way he thought when he supposedly wrote? You know, if there's anything that people can agree with, is that John didn't write John. And there is a chance that John the Presbyter might have written Revelation. That seems like that may be correct. So having all the disciples dead. Two, what do you do with the Transfiguration? And look at the oddity and the solidarity in this text, is that all three accounts place this Transfiguration after Jesus makes this statement. So now we have to think about it the other way. It's like, well, why is it here then? What is this strange little event that takes place with no prompting? So if Jesus isn't talking about the Transfiguration, it literally just happens. That would just strike me as odd. It does not seem to be what the text is indicating. It seems like they're building up to the Transfiguration, where Jesus, by God, he shows them with Moses and Elijah in a vision, and he says, listen to him. So they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. They see him taking control over the law and the prophets by God's own words. And I think that's what the text is pointing to. It's just very odd that all three pointed out that there's this Transfiguration, and it happens 6 to 8 days after Jesus tells them that some of them won't taste death. Two of them do point out specifically it's only to the disciples. Mark does the way it is, the way it's translated, the way it's kind of left open that it may be more people than the disciples. But if you're going to establish everything by the word of two witnesses, it would seem that Mark and Luke shed light or correct Mark in this category. So those would be my main bones of contention with the Transfiguration not being the thing that they were going to see. And that's just my point of view on it. It's just textually odd. I don't see why this would happen. But so there it is. And like I said, I'm going to try and keep these short, even though they're kind of based on the way preterists, you know, present some of this stuff. It's very tangled together. But so that's my take on it. That's the Transfiguration versus the 70 AD mark. God bless.